Hello, psychology. We are going to continue our studying of thinking and problem solving. So as we do this, keep in mind some of your own processes and some of the things that sometimes get in the way of you being able to come to a solution or how you approach problems, and see how some of these psychology terms actually connect with your own life and how you think and problem solve. So let's first come up with some definitions, and let's look at the word thinking. Thinking, or cognition, because that's a good synonym, refers to a process that involves knowing and understanding, remembering, and communicating. And this is different from the cognitive perspective of psychology, which we've already learned about. And thinking is that process of what we go through to understand, to know, to remember, and to communicate. And when we think about thinking, we need to look at it from sometimes a creative standpoint. And when we think about creative thinking or creativity and thinking, there are two terms that correlate with that type of cognition. And the words are convergent and divergent thinker. So if you look at this little cartoon here and you look at the picture of the flower, a convergent thinker would come at this from the perspective of narrowing down the available problem solutions to determine the best solution. So a convergent thinker is going to be very cut and dry about the possible solutions to a question. Whereas a divergent thinker is going to expand the number of possible problem solutions. A divergent thinker is going to be much more creative. If you are a divergent person or you diverge from the road, you're going off the main road or the main direction, the accepted direction, which would mean possibly that you're more creative. And you can, again, see from the cartoon there, the differences between the two types of thinking. So there's a psychologist by the name of Robert Sternberg, and he believes in something called the triarchic theory of intelligence. And he believes that people have three different forms of intelligence, and this intelligence allows us to approach problem solving from different perspectives. And so those three types of intelligence, he believes, are the creative intelligence, analytical intelligence, and practical intelligence, or if you can remember the acronym CAP, a triangle, CAP. So creative intelligence would involve looking at things from new or novel perspectives. Someone who is analytic is going to have much more book smarts or put more emphasis on education. And if you have practical intelligence, you have those street smarts, kind of those day-to-day skills. You can go out into the world and you just get a sense of the environment around you. And those are seen as different types of intelligence, according to Robert Sternberg. So as we look at problem solving and thinking, we have to look at the idea of concepts and what that actually is. And there's kind of three key components to this. First is the actual concept. And a concept is what we would call a category. And again, you can see the highlighted terms there to help you remember that a concept is really a category. And then there's the schema. And the schema is that idea that if you close your eyes, you can picture something. You can see the features. You can see a mental representation, and that's the schema. And then there's a prototype. And a prototype is what we would call the best example or the most popular example. And again, notice the highlighted P's to help you remember a prototype is the most popular example. So going a little bit more specific on these concepts. A concept is a mental grouping of similar objects, events, ideas, people. So you can see here in this picture, there's a variety of chairs there. But when you're trying to come up with a concept of what a chair is, you have to look at some of those similar features, those common features. So of all of those chairs, are they all chairs? I don't know. Most of those pictures, there is a back, there is a seat, there are legs, yet that one blue seat in the middle, that one blue chair, is that really a chair? Is a beanbag chair really a chair? So it's just a matter of your concept of what a chair really is. So when we look at concepts, we have to organize information into a concept. So for instance, men's deodorant would be a concept. It's a category. But going a step further, a schema is going to help us understand what the concept is so that we can generate expectations about what it does. So a schema, the mental representation, okay, that idea we have in our head, really is an opportunity for us to list those characteristics of the concept. So a schema can be a list of characteristics about the concept. It's a mental representation. So we have concepts, we have schemas, and then that allows us to develop what we call a prototype. And a prototype is that mental image or best example. And remember that a prototype is the most popular example. So a robin would be a prototype of a bird because it's likely that when we think of a mental image of a bird or a best example of a bird, the penguin or even an ostrich, those don't really count as the best example or the most popular example of what a bird is, whereas the robin is more likely to be the prototype for what a bird is. So now let's take a look at problem solving. What do we do when we have a question to solve or a problem to solve? And the term algorithm needs to be considered as we look at problem solving. And we're not talking about a mathematical algorithm. It's nothing that difficult, or at least difficult for some of us. But an algorithm would be a methodical, logical rule or procedure that guarantees solving a particular problem. There's a guaranteed result. But an algorithm takes a long time. Every possibility is exhausted before there is a solution. Again, very time consuming, but it guarantees a solution. So for instance, your mom sends you to the store to get some oatmeal. So if you were to use an algorithm when you went into the grocery store, you would go up and down every single aisle until you found it. That would be the logical solution to finding the oatmeal in the store using an algorithm. A heuristic is a simple thinking strategy that allows you to make judgments and solve problems efficiently. So you are enhancing your likelihood of success. It's not a guarantee though. A heuristic is not a guarantee. You're not always going to get a solution, and you might actually encounter some errors. But the great thing about a heuristic though is it is more realistic. A heuristic is more realistic. So on that search for oatmeal, again at the grocery store, using a heuristic, you would be more likely to save time if you read the signs above each aisle and looked for cereal, because that is the concept of what oatmeal is. Another way that we can approach problems is by using insight. And insight involves sudden, novel, or new realization of a solution to a problem. Sudden or novel realization of a solution to a problem. So in order to have insight, you need to have some prior experience to have that insight. If you've never experienced something, there's no way that you can have insight into how to solve that problem. Going through a problem and approaching it with trial and error is going to give you insight into that problem. If you approach a problem and you are saying things like, well, the last time I did this, I tried this solution, that would be utilizing insight. The interesting thing about insight is that both humans and animals use insight. This experiment here that you see a picture of, these monkeys were trying to get to this lever that was going to take them to food, but they had to be able to get to that lever. So they used insight to come up with a solution of stacking those boxes so that they could reach the lever that would take them to the food. So we've all experienced obstacles in problem solving. So some of those obstacles could involve something called fixation. And when you have fixation, you have an inability to see a problem from a fresh perspective. And it will keep you from solving a problem. That one-track mind. You can't look at something with a fresh perspective. So an example would be what we call a mental set. You've got a mental set, and it's a tendency for your old patterns of problem solving to persist, and they make it impossible for us to see new ways to solve problems. An example of a mental set would be what we call functional fixedness. And functional fixedness means that we have a tendency to think of only familiar functions for objects. So there's a picture of a bobby pin then, a bobby pin. And that bobby pin is used in someone's hair. When you're fixing someone's hair, you're trying to hold your hair in place. Functional fixedness would say that is the only way and the only reason that a bobby pin exists, is to put in somebody's hair. But there are so many other ways that you can use a bobby pin, right? So functional fixedness says there's only one way to use a familiar object. But we know that that can be an obstacle in coming up with a solution for a problem. Another obstacle is what we call confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is a tendency to search for information that confirms a personal bias that we have. So we want to be right. We want to be right. We're not willing to listen to others' opinions. We will seek out the information that confirms what we believe. So we seek evidence to support ideas, and we tend to dismiss evidence that's contrary to our way of thinking. You can show me all the evidence in the world about an idea, but because of confirmation bias, I know this to be true, regardless of the evidence that you might be showing me. So another way to look at this, you believe that your boyfriend is faithful, and you don't notice all the other texts that he's getting from girls, and that he's not available like he once was. But you pay attention to the fact that he calls you once a day, and when you see him for a date, he brings you flowers. So regardless of the fact that he's not texting you and you're not seeing him as often, you disregard that because confirmation bias tells you that he is still being faithful to you. So there are heuristics that we can use to solve a problem, but they actually can get in the way of solving problems as well. So they can help solve problems, but they could also bias our judgment. And there's something called a representative heuristic, where we judge the likelihood of things or objects in terms of how well they seem to represent or match a particular prototype. They represent what we have already in our mind, and this allows us to make very quick judgments. And that word prototype, we have to have a prototype or the most popular representation of an idea in our mind. And that representative heuristic is going to keep us maybe from being a little more open-minded or finding another solution to a problem. So if you were to see a person on the street and you meet a man and they're dressed in slacks and they have a sweater and they're wearing glasses and they're not very built, they're rather small build and kind of soft-spoken and shy. If I were to ask you if that person were a librarian or a construction worker, based on the prototype in your mind of what a librarian might look like, you would probably say that it's a librarian and not a construction worker. And that's what we call a representative heuristic, judging the likelihood of things or objects in terms of how they represent a particular prototype. There's another type of heuristic that's called an availability heuristic. An availability heuristic is a cognitive shortcut in which the probability of an event is determined by how easily the event can be brought to mind. So what is your available information? So you can quickly, in your mind, go to that information that you've heard most recently, that you've seen more often. Okay, that is the available information. You choose the alternative that is most available to you. So an example of an availability heuristic. People are usually more afraid of dying in a plane crash than they are a car crash, an auto accident, despite the facts that say plane crashes happen less frequently. But when we hear about a plane crash, they seem to be much more tragic. And so that information is more available to us because we see it, we hear it on the news. And that's what we call an availability heuristic. You make your decision, you solve your problem based on the available information that you have. Another obstacle would be what we call overconfidence. And overconfidence is a tendency to overestimate the accuracy of your beliefs and judgments, that you might have more skill or more talent or more time to finish something than you really do. The accuracy of your beliefs. So think about a project that you had to do in the past and how long did you think it would take? And then you start working on it. And the reality is your accuracy of your beliefs on how long it's going to take, it really didn't match up. And that is what we call overconfidence. So as we talk about problem solving, it's often a matter of framing in terms of how we might make a decision in solving problems. So how an issue is presented can significantly affect our decisions and our judgment. And really what framing is, it's framing the exact issue in two different ways. How information is given to you can produce very different results. And the best way to understand this is to look at a couple of examples. So if you were an advertising representative and you were trying to figure out the best way to get people to buy ground beef, would you sell it as showing on the label that it is 25% fat, or would you show it as 25% lean? So you have to ask yourself, are people searching for a healthier alternative? Well, they want to know that the word fat is automatically going to make them think that, ooh, this has fat. That's not good. But if it's 75% lean, ooh, I might rather have this because it's not as bad for me. It's actually healthy because it's 75% lean. It's the same product. It's just framed differently. When we talk about surgeries, would you be more comfortable having a surgery if you knew that there was a 90% success rate in the surgery? Or if the doctors told you that they have a 10% failure rate? Which would you rather hear? And this is what framing is, and how an issue is presented to you and how it can affect your decisions and your judgments. So we also go into problem solving with bias. And bias is our tendency for pre-existing beliefs to distort our reasoning. And sometimes that distortion can bring us to some invalid conclusions. So there's something called belief perseverance, and that's our tendency to cling to beliefs in the face of contrary evidence. So if you believe that the grass is purple, you look outside, you look at your neighbor's yard, and you believe that grass is purple, even with every shred of evidence and experts telling you contrary to what you believe, you, because of belief perseverance, are going to cling to that idea and still believe that grass is purple. This is belief perseverance. And obviously it's leading you to an invalid conclusion. And there you go. That is what thinking is all about, and cognition, and some of those obstacles that might get in your way of being able to solve a problem. So have a great day, psychology.